So, welcome to Grill Country. My guest today is Peter, who I met in Chino. So, this is another one of my Chino Encounters series where I have conversations with people that I got a chance to meet at the Chino conference. And Peter was in my small group, my estuary group at the Chino conference, and he had lots of interesting things to say there, and I'm sure he's going to have lots of interesting things to say today. I kind of invited him today to kind of just tell me a bit of his story so that we get to know each other better. And I think anytime we listen to each other's stories, it's always an opportunity to learn something. So Peter, why don't you go ahead and tell me about yourself, where you're from, what your background is, what road led you to Chino, however you want to start, whenever you
Long,
want to start.
long road.
Yeah, I'm sure you have lots to tell, so I'm here to
I
listen.
I grew up in Western Massachusetts, about 90 miles west of Boston, in
Right.
a town called Springfield, Massachusetts, and grew up in a very secular environment. I think on occasion my parents would take us to church for a year or two, but they were not very interested in what was going on, and I certainly, in my youth, wasn't the least bit interested. And basically, I grew up uh, esteeming education beyond everything else. Um, my parents had completely swallowed that narrative, the kind of meritocratic narrative, how you figure out who you are and how you enter into the world of success.
And what just so we can place this in time, what year were you born, Peter?
I was born in 1953,
Okay.
and Springfield was
So you're really close to my parents were both born in 1952, so you're really
no
close to.
kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm getting up there. Yeah, try not to think about it too much.
Well, my
But anyway,
parents were don't feel too old. My parents were really young when I was born, so.
yeah, yeah, my mother was 39 when I was born. So yeah, I mean, Springfield is a very liberal, democratic city. Um, all the public schools I went to, it was all very progressive education. Um, and quite honestly, I never thought about God. Um, I just thought about, who I was, trying to define who I was. And naturally, when you get in your adolescence, I actually wanted to share with you something I wrote, just
Hmm.
kind of as an introduction.
Go for it.
Something I wrote about 15 years ago one day. Um, so I was a miserable person. I was angry. I was wounded. I was tormented. I was mean. I was confused. I was a bully. I was a liar. I was hateful. I was unloved. I was ridiculed. I was mocked. I was selfish. I was a hypocrite. I was completely transparent to myself. I hated myself. I hated my life. It enraged me. I was an adolescent. I was defenseless. I was maybe 13 or 14. In one monolithic Herculean act of rebellion, I denied that any of these things were true. I stopped replaying every memory I ever had, going all the way back to the beginning of my childhood. It was for a time my salvation until it wasn't. I couldn't reinvent myself. So I read that because um, I wanted to emphasize that I was a child who was full of rage. And probably from the time I was in the fourth grade, pretty much through 11th grade in high school, I was kind of a rebel. Didn't do any schoolwork, no homework, didn't read books, just kind of hung out with my buddies and got in trouble. And then something life changing happened to me. I had been listening to all those seductive rock and roll songs about what was going on in San Francisco.
Mhm.
And the only thing I knew about my life was, I got to go to California. Somehow I'm going to get there, But before I went there, I was 16. I had just turned 16, never been drunk, never been stoned, was a virgin. And I started taking LSD, and not small doses. I was hanging around with a couple older people who gave me, I guess, what you call those heroic doses, that
Mhm.
Terrence McKenna talks about. And I was transformed in one 24-hour period. I just suddenly, that window into a spiritual world, another dimension completely opened up to me. And naturally, I was dumbfounded and wondered, what am I going to do about this? Because I couldn't really talk to anybody about it or explain what had happened to me.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, I knew that something profound had happened to me. Meanwhile, as I had said earlier when I read that short piece, I was really in a bad place mentally. I was just full of rage and judgment against the world, against my parents, against everybody, my friends. Um, and as far as denying that I was any of those things and transforming myself, I thought I could perhaps reinvent myself as an artist. The thought occurred to me as a poet, maybe as a musician, but I didn't know what poetry was. And I remember in the 11th grade, we were studying poetry, and I said, I have no idea how to understand this. I have no idea what it is. I don't know what they're talking about. And then I miraculously began to understand that I have to experience the same thing the poets experienced in order for me to enter in and understand what they're talking about and embody it myself. And that door opened up to me. And I started reading books. I started playing music, but I was really carrying an 800-pound monkey on my back. I continued to do drugs pretty much every day for about 7 years. And I wasn't 2 weeks out of high school, graduating, and I hitchhiked across Canada. Next thing I know, I'm living in Arizona. Next thing I know, I'm living in Hawaii, and just all over the place, hitchhiking, driving, any means possible. And really searching, kind of believing that there was some expert out there who would eventually tell me what the hell was going on. Of course, I never ran into him. And
Mhm.
occasionally I would get glimpses of answers I'm basically a cherry picker. I have been all my life.
Mhm.
If it's a part of a poem or something I read in a novel or in a book about psychology or some lyric I heard in a song, because I opened up this door, I suppose, on the LSD, it's always been easy for me to embrace the reality of the kind of power of the epiphany that I would have when I would read something or hear something. I would immediately take it to heart, and I understood intuitively that it was leading me someplace, and
Mhm.
that I didn't know when, but I had some optimism that it was going to lead me to an understanding of what this other dimension of reality was
Mhm.
that nobody I knew seemed to be really paying attention to. Um, and I know I'm getting kind of wordy here.
No, no.
To make a long story short, I was looking for love, but all I was finding was power. And I didn't realize that that's what I was looking for. I kind of like in a kind of half-assed way I was reading a lot of Carlos Castaneda.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
sort of wasn't like I was fancying myself as a shaman in some egotistical way. I just wanted to know what those powers were,
Right,
those
right.
gifts were. I wanted to, it was like chasing, Ariadne's thread. I just kept following that thread all over the country, from one place to another, from one idea to another. But through that process, I kept taking LSD and mushrooms. I mean, I went to Hawaii the first time just so I could take mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
That was my goal in life at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And, needless to say, my parents did not understand. But something was happening to me at the same time. I was hearing voices, and I started having delusions of grandeur, kind of like a messianic complex.
Mm-hmm.
Started getting really paranoid. Heard a lot of voices telling me different things, how to think or what was going on. And it was scaring the hell out of me, quite honestly. And
Mm-hmm.
this kept escalating through my late
When
teens.
you hear, can I ask you about your hearing voices? Like, how did you experience that? Did it feel like you're hearing voices? Was that like, did that come through? Like, were you hearing audible voices in your head, or was it like, were there like just like these layers of subtext that would come through your intuition through things that other people were saying?
It was more like that, the latter.
Okay, then I know exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, I could, I could. One time I was watching Johnny Carson.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're
I'm
talking
a
about.
teenager, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of his monologue, and he hesitates and he starts looking around. And he says, "Who is this? Who is this fucking kid from Massachusetts?"
Yeah, yeah,
That's all
yeah,
he had to say.
yeah.
And it was totally out of context of his
Right, but you heard it
what he
because
was saying, but I heard it that he was talking to me.
yeah, I know exactly the experience you're talking about. I can remember like when I did a fair amount of psychedelics in my youth too. And when I was in college, I can remember like just like having some very similar type of experiences. And it would always just be like something that was like, yeah, either something that was like said on television or something that one of my friends said in conversation, but it's like something else was talking through that them directly to me. Is
Right.
how I experienced it.
Yeah, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of synchronicity, but it's not the kind of synchronicity that I experienced later, which we're going to go
Right.
into later.
Right. It wasn't
It just
pleasant
kept
stuff.
leading into darker and
Yeah.
darker places,
Yes. Yes.
and I kept encountering darker and darker individuals that
Yep.
would come into my life.
Yeah.
And, I was maybe seeking them out, but they were seeking me out, but I was
Right. Yeah. So the
not
drugs open you up
savory.
to the drugs open you up to the realities of like the spiritual world and the full dimensionality of the reality that we inhabit. But not everything there is safe or has your best interest in heart.
Well, it's astonishing how real it seems, though. It makes
Yeah.
there's total logic in that
Yeah.
world as well, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
That was perhaps the hardest reason why I couldn't escape it,
Yeah.
because there were confirmations. It
Yeah.
just was leading me into a bad place, a
Yeah.
darker and darker place.
Yeah.
I will share one other, because I know time's limited. There was one night, and I was with a buddy, and we were really high. We were doing mushrooms and I don't amphetamines and LSD and drinking and smoking pot and eating hashish.
Mhm.
Something out of a Hunter Thompson, incident. And suddenly, I was driving, and I had a vision, a waking vision while I was driving, and I could see from outer space. I was looking at the entirety of the Earth as a globe, and there was this black clad figure, kind of like a Johnny Cash type figure, with big black boots and a big long black coat. I couldn't see his face. And he started running around the edge of the globe. And the globe started spinning faster and faster. And I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I mean, because of my paranoia, I kept falling into hyperventilating on many occasions daily. And this was one of those occasions where I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. But then I thought, somebody I know is going to die. Well, that night, about 10 hours later, and I hope I'm not being too revealing, but I dropped my buddy off, and not before I tried to crash the car into a big tree, not because I wanted to take my life, but I had the thought that if I kill myself, I will automatically enter into this next dimension that I've been seeking so fervently for the last 4 years. Pretty crazy, you know. He grabbed the steering wheel at the last minute. I dropped him off at his house, and I was sitting in his driveway in my car, and I decided to just turn the engine on and go to sleep and kill myself. Well, I probably woke up about an hour later and I'd run out of gas. So that was a good thing. And I got out of the car and I ran home. I was still living in between my travels. I was still living at my parents' house. So I ran home in about 1 degree weather. I ran home 11 miles, got to my parents' house about 6 in the morning, and they were both fully dressed, sitting in the living room, which was never the case. And I walked in the front door, and they looked at me, and I thought immediately they were going to start yelling at me. And instead, my father told me that John, his best friend, had just died that night of a heart attack. Well, that was a kind of synchronicity that was not a good thing, if you know what I mean. But those kind of, incidents, those experiences, have remained in my playbook, in my memory. Okay. So anyhow, to make a long story short, I went back.
I mean, just like the thing about those kinds of experiences is that, like, even though they can be dark and terrifying, they're at least not boring.
No.
Right? So I mean, so so that's why people find them attractive, and that's why people go back.
It's very seductive.
That's why people go back to them, even though, like, they know that, like, it's not necessarily all bright and shiny and pretty. But
I actually have this great book that was written by this doctor, I think it's, if I remember, Peter Podville. It's called The Seduction of Madness. He was part of some institute in Boulder during the 80s. And I it's true, it was incredibly seductive, and empowering if you wanted to be some kind of a dark shaman, you could use that.
Yeah.
To overpower people,
Yeah.
But I wasn't like that. That wasn't in my heart, So, but anyhow,
no, because let's get back to what you said earlier about, like, when did you figure out that it was love that you were looking for? And it's like, and I would also like to ask you this question. It's like, how is that, like, discovery of but love being being what you were looking for, and whatever led to you figuring that? I want to hear that story, but I also want to know, like, if that ever helped you figure out what you were angry about, like what was driving that anger that you
well, eventually I understood the anger, but I have to finish my
go for it
salvation story first.
You go for it.
I'm skipping several years. I'm in Hawaii. I'm 22. I'm really at the bottom now. Okay. And one night, 4:00 in the morning, I felt like I was going to die by the time I was 25 if I continued on track with the way I was living and thinking. And I just kind of said, I'm going to go back to the mainland. I'm going to, go to California. I'm going to hitchhike up the West Coast to British Columbia. And when I find a mountain somewhere along that route, I'm going to climb up there and I'm going to sit there for 6 weeks. If it takes 6 weeks for God to come and tell me who he is once and for all, I'm going to do it. And it was that decision, it wasn't love. It was just, I just had this necessity. I wasn't healthy. I had this need I had no peace in my life. I had no love in my life. But I did make a decision, that I'm waiting. I'm waiting to hear from you, God, and I'm not hearing from you. And so I could turn this into a 3-hour story, but to make a long story short, I got to California and I was staying with a friend on the beach in Carpinteria. And I was overstaying my visit after about a month. And I sort of postponed my trip up the coast to British Columbia. Finally, I got out there on the highway and I'm hitchhiking. And this is where synchronicity really, in a good way, really comes into play yet again. And I'm standing on the side of the road on Route 1, a little south of Santa Barbara, and there's probably about 50 people hitchhiking out there. This is 1975. There was still a lot of hitchhikers in those days. And this elderly woman started walking towards me from a distance. I would say in her mid-70s, very wrinkled skin and very kind of tattered, worn out clothes, but clean. And she just kept staring at me. And I remember thinking, Earth Mother, she was walking towards me.
Mm-hmm.
And all the woman did was she came up to me, she looked me in the eyes and she said, "Where are you going?" And I went, "I have no idea." And she handed me a crumpled Bible tract, kind of like one of those R. Crumb Bible tracts they used to pass out in the 70s. And she said, "Well, when you get there, go to a Foursquare Pentecostal church." And of course, I'd never heard of a Foursquare church.
Mm-hmm.
And had never been in one. So I get picked up and I started, hanging out with this guy from San Diego. And he thought it would be a good idea to go to British Columbia with me. And we started driving this van up through Northern California. And he wanted to stop in Eugene, Oregon and see if he could look up an old friend. So here we are in Eugene. I said, fine, And so the first day we were there, we went into a bar and we got invited to a party. And the guy who invited us to the party said we could stay at his house. So we did that. And he met a girl at this party. And that was it. He was no longer going to British Columbia. So I was stuck in Eugene without a ride and in a strange house. And these two young people my age, after this kind of crazy party the night before, at which they were also present, sat me down and started talking to me about Jesus. And of course, I didn't want to hear it, but they were really nice people, nevertheless, really, really sweet people. And I was hanging out with them for a few days, and they were a couple crazy political hippies, but they were also had become born again Christian. And I had no idea what that meant or anything. To make a long story short, I had one night left in Eugene before I was going to leave, and I was looking for a place to sleep and clean up. I had nowhere to go. They had a hotline in town there. So I went to the hotline, and they said, well, you can go to one of three places: the Mission, the Shiloh House, or the Christian Liberation House. And they'll put you up for the night. So I'm walking through the center of town on my way to this Christian Liberation House because I thought, well, that sounds the most liberal, kind of, I probably get along with these people just fine, for a night. And I got in the center of town, in the center of Eugene. They closed down all the roads. It's just like a mall in the downtown area. And all of a sudden, this incredible peace came over me out of nowhere. And again, I thought, my 5 or 7 years of struggling to find the meaning of life, I suddenly broke through some psychic barrier. And this overwhelming peace just completely flooded my body. And it was a peace that I probably hadn't experienced since I was 7 years old. And I kind of sat in the middle of this outdoor mall area in a bench seat for about 15 minutes, soaking up that peace and just marveling at it. And then I got up and I started walking to the address of this Christian Liberation House. And as I was walking down the street, about a couple blocks away from my destination, this voice in my head said, "What are you going to do tonight, Peter?" And this other voice seemed to say, "Oh, I'm going to go to church and pray." Well, it was a Wednesday, late in the afternoon. And again, I was not raised religious in any way, shape, or form. Didn't go to church very much in my life. And I had no idea that people went to church on Wednesdays. But I heard that voice. And I got to this house, and there was this beautiful young woman sitting on the front steps of this house, and she's waving me, "Hey, brother." And I talked to her, and she says, "Sure, you can stay here for 3 days and 3 nights. And the only stipulation, the only rule we have is you have to come to church with us." And it was Wednesday night, and they were going to church in 25 minutes. So I said, sure. So I went to church with them, and it was one of those small mega churches that was an offshoot from the Church on the Way. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Chuck Smith, that whole Southern California movement. And by the way, it was
I'm the offspring of Jesus people.
Yeah.
I spent the first 6 months of life in a Jesus people commune.
Did you really?
But my mom actually bought that house in the 90s and lives there now.
Where was this?
It's in Hoquiam, Washington.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know a little bit about this.
Yeah. I really, you know what I remember the most? You know what I remember the most is the music. I remember the music.
It was good.
The music was really good, and I still remember some of the songs from when I was really little.
Yeah.
That they would sing. Yeah.
No, there were some really fine bands that came out of that movement in Southern California, that's for sure. Yeah. So yeah, it was a four-square church, like this woman, this elderly woman on the side of the road in California said, "Go to a four-square church." So here I am sitting in this church with about 3,000 or 4,000 people on a Wednesday night. And this pastor, I remember his first name was Larry, started preaching, and I wasn't paying attention. But then all of a sudden I was kind of like mesmerized by what he was saying. And I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior. And then I had another waking vision, and the whole top of the church opened up, and there were these just violent, like Category 5 hurricane storm clouds, like in the sky that I was seeing through the open church ceiling, and really ominous, dangerous, mustard black, mercury colored clouds. And suddenly I saw it was like just the densest color red blood started flowing through all the blackness and gray clouds, and through all the turbulence, this blood started swirling around inside of the clouds. And then eventually it all turned white, and it was all just incredibly white. And I knew I was forgiven. I had this incredible burden that I had been carrying, which started when I was about 7 or 8 and had lasted up until just a half hour earlier. That entire weight of guilt and shame and anxiety, unbelievable anxiety I've been carrying around for years, completely lifted in an instant. And next thing I know, I became part of this commune for almost 4 years. I lived in a Christian commune in Eugene, Oregon. And it was basically like 30 guys and 30 women. And we had an open door policy that anybody that knocked on our door could stay there for 3 days and 3 nights as long as they went to church, and we would feed them. And of course, we would invite them to the numerous Bible studies that went on every day in the morning. And then we had work crews and all that. And there was a lovely bunch of young people like myself from all over the world in the United States who had had, not the exact experience of me, but they ended up at this Christian Liberation House and at this Foursquare church. And it was quite powerful. And, I started reading the Bible cover to cover. And it was just like the word said, it was like the word of God was like, it was like meat to my soul, to my bones. I could feel it, literally going into into my bones, right down to the marrow, not all of it, but an awful lot of it. And so everything was all right for the first 6 months. I was actually pretty ecstatic, maybe even almost in a manic state. And one day, the individual who was the assistant pastor at that time, who happened to be preaching on the night that I accepted Christ there, he used to have a Bible study every Sunday morning, which I would go to, and he was great. He was down to earth, modest, knowledgeable, very intuitive, and it was like he was always, whatever scripture he was teaching that day, whatever homily he gave or whatever, seemed significant to me. I mean, it was really feeding me. And then one Sunday morning, I went in there and it was all dead. And everything he said was completely dead to me. And I'm there, what the hell is going on? What happened to this guy? And shortly thereafter, a couple months later, I continued to go, by the way, for the next several Sundays for about 2 months. And then the pastor of the church said, I have bad news. This assistant pastor, after years of service, had fallen to temptation, and had gotten himself involved with 7 different women in the church that he had been counseling sexually, obviously. And he was being kicked out of the church. And that kind of blew my mind at the time, because I really liked the guy. And so, that incident came and went. But I do remember from the very beginning, where I was part of this commune, and I should preface this by saying that I had a real problem with authority in my life going back to my childhood. So that was an issue I've had to work through over the years. But I remember I started questioning some of the doctrines that the leader of this commune was teaching. And my intuition was telling me, I'm not buying this. But every time I tried to talk to it with one of my so-called elder brothers or sisters in the Lord who had been there longer than me, they either didn't understand what I was asking them, or didn't want to go there, or thought that I was maybe, straying into some kind of heretical territory. And but I kept sticking it out, doing everything in my power to be the kind of Christian I thought Christ wanted me to be. And then one day, after about 3.5 years, I went down to visit a friend in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and he invited me to go to this church. And I went to this church, and it was a big, big deal in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was called the Worldwide Church of Christ or something like that. It had an enormous old Presbyterian church, beautiful building in Berkeley where they practiced the religion. And I ended up staying with some of the young guys my age, and they were in a communal situation as well. And they were the elders of this church, being disciplined to become future leaders of this church. And they took a liking to me. And I said to them, I started telling them, gave witness to my salvation, and they were really impressed with that. And so they started listening to other things I had to say about, like, why are you guys all dressed the same? Why are you all wearing blue shirts and blue ties and blue pants? Why are all the women sitting on one side of the church and all the guys on the other side of the church? And there were a number of other issues that, very innocently, I questioned them on. Well, next thing you know, the pastor and the assistant pastor of this church happened to be away for a few weeks at some big conference in Australia or someplace. And one of the guys I've been talking to took over the service one Sunday morning, and he gets up in the pulpit, and he didn't make reference to me, but he suddenly tears off his shirt. He's got an undershirt underneath there, and then he takes out a squirt gun, and there's like 2,000 people in this church, right? On a Sunday morning. And he starts running after the other young elders in the church and starts squirting them with a squirt gun around the church, running around the church. And they all start taking their shirts off and pulling their ties off. Well, when the elders came back, the pastor and the assistant pastor, they were not very happy about any of this. And they knew that I was the source of their, newfound rebellion.
Right.
And they completely excoriated me that following Sunday morning in front of their whole congregation. And they went on for about a half hour, tearing me apart in front of the whole church. So I left, and I had no plans on staying there anyhow. I was just curious what was going on there. And I was staying with a friend. And so I found my way back up to the commune in Eugene, and I was still living there. And I had a close friend who was in love with a girl, and he was kind of a misanthrope, but I loved him dearly. He was a gifted singer and a very devout Christian. And he was falling apart because the elders in the commune had interfered with his love life. And they had dissuaded this love of his life that she shouldn't marry him. And they kind of pushed her in the direction of this other guy who she started dating. Make a long story short, my friend was completely distraught. And I thought it was my job. I didn't like what had happened. I didn't think they should have been intervening in our personal life at that level. So I went to talk to the elder, and this normally absolutely peaceful, mild-mannered guy just turned on me like a ravenous wolf. And he started screaming at me, and he physically came after me, and he called out for some other brothers who were in the hallway to come in. And 5 or 6 of them attacked me, lifted me up, and threw me out in the front lawn and threatened me with citizen's arrest if I ever came back in that commune again. Just because I was defying the authority of the elder. And I wasn't really defying, I just started asking questions, and he simply didn't like the direction that those questions were taking.
Right.
So after 3.5 years, these people were my best friends, right? And I was without a home. Now I know time's probably limited, but I ended up, one way or another, I ended up back in Massachusetts, and eventually ended up.
How long did it take before you ended up in how long after they
I've been in Eugene almost 5 years, almost, not quite.
Did you go back to Massachusetts right away, or did you?
I went to Boulder, and I stayed in Boulder for about 3 months, and then I decided to go back to Massachusetts. And through word of mouth, I heard about this little fundamentalist church that was about 50 people in a big white house. And some young people had told me about it, my age. So I went there, and it was an Italian fundamentalist, born again Christian church that had started like 40 or 50 years earlier. And I really liked the people there. And it was only, like I said, about 50 people. Well, over the next 3 years, we built it up to about 1,200 people. And the pastor was a very charismatic guy. and he was very gifted in, as you know, fundamentalists, non-denominational Christians believe in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and he prophesied, he laid hands on people all the time, and we all did. And I kind of moved, even in 1975 when I first was born again. That was an easy move for me. I immediately started laying my hands on people and having visions and seeing things like prophecy. And so I was an integral part of this church as it grew from 50 to 1,200 people. But running concurrent with all the good news, I saw a lot of bullshit that I didn't like. And I caught the pastor in a huge lie that had real deep implications for the whole church, but especially for the individuals that he was lying to. And if what can I say about it other than this guy was truly gifted? Like, his visions and stuff were often verified, not just by me, but if he was there on any given night, on a Wednesday or Friday or Sunday night, and say the Holy Spirit wasn't moving through him, so to speak, he felt that he had to say something anyhow. And he started, I suppose you know, succumbing to the sin of pride, because all these people were flocking to this church and saying, "Oh, Pastor, you're so wonderful, you know, you're just so wonderful." And I guess there was part of his personality that wasn't ready for that kind of adulation. And I started, sharing with a couple people that I thought I could trust. We're going, we're going off the rails here, and even though we're growing, I can already see we're going to completely go off the rails here. And there were a few of them that trusted me, but they were also in a closer inner circle with this pastor, and they were afraid to say anything. To make a long story short, I eventually left. There just was no place for me. But I spent about 10 years there, and during that time, I was involved with healing for those 10 years of laying hands on people. And I probably laid my hands on 20,000 people over 10 years. And as you know, they fall in the Holy Spirit and they speak in tongues and all this wild stuff. And I used to prophesy, but I still hadn't found love. It was crazy. And I didn't really fully understand what grace was. And here I was doing everything in my power, kind of like Paul, just trying to, follow the law in every respect. But I was miserable in my personal life. And I started trusting little by little that it's okay. Maybe you don't belong here anymore, or maybe there's some unfinished business. There's some things that you do not understand yet about the Bible, about the promises of God, and maybe you're going to have to go somewhere else and take another journey before you discover what these things were. And that basically is what happened to me. I left the church, and sure enough, about 6 years later, that church completely fell apart. Literally, the roof caved in. The pastor and the elders, some of the elders left, and the pastor, who was being raised up to be the leader of this church, he was kind of not the guy for the job. Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. So I have not worshiped in church since 1991. However, my walk of faith, I reckon I'm still talking to the same Holy Spirit that I was talking to in 1975. And it wasn't until I left the church that I fully understood what grace was. And it wasn't until a few years after that that I finally my heart started softening to the point where I started to understand what love was. And but it took me almost 20 years just to understand grace, not at the intellectual level, but at the heart level, you know, in my solar plexus and everything. But during that time, I should say, when I was 14, my blood pressure was 165 over 110. Not good for a 14-year-old.
No,
And
not
it
at
was
all.
still that high when I was 22 and became born again. One of the first things I did was I learned how to reduce my blood pressure down to 120 over 70 through faith and through prayer and meditation, and it worked. And the other thing was I had an 800-pound gorilla. I mean, it's one thing, like, it's funny how, whatever you want to call them, Satan or the dark forces or the whatever they are, however you might describe them or believe them to be, it's the most seemingly benign forces that don't smack of anything dark or evil, that are the
Yeah,
most dangerous,
yeah,
and become the most ideologically powerful forces. So I was still suffering from delusions of grandeur, and I was still hyperventilating, and I had these 800-pound gorillas, imps, on my back. And it only took about 6 months through my faith to kind of pick them out of my psyche and learn how to keep them out of my psyche. And to this day, I've been healthy. And I was practically a full-blown schizophrenic at that point. I mean, I was totally paranoid. I thought I sometimes wouldn't drink a drink because I thought somebody was trying to poison me because I was Jesus Christ and they had to get rid of me,
hmm
I was certifiable. And those kind of, Stephen King kind of monsters,
What happened? What happened? What happened to open that to you? Was there any singular event, or just kind of
I
gradually
think it was
happened?
just, I started reading parts of the Bible, certain promises, certain scriptures, a lot of Proverbs,
Hmm.
but a lot of promises, like simple things like, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I said, well, here's my faith. I have no idea what that means. So, but I believed intuitively, I believed that the Holy Spirit would reveal to me, even though there was no foundation of understanding, that he would build that foundation, or the Holy Spirit would build that foundation in me. And somehow through patience and through, a word here or an encouraging word there, or a confirmation, this and that, through synchronicity, those promises became real to me.
Yeah,
They became,
George MacDonald wrote a great sermon on that the on both on the idea that the truth will set you free, and Jesus saying, "I am the truth." And he talks about how the truth that is being spoken of there is not the kind of truth that you can point at as if it were like an object in the world, right? That it's he says it's a truth, it's a truth lived, a truth breathed, a truth loved. Like, so he points to it being, it's a kind of truth that is ultimately only revealed in a person.
right.
Right. And the way a person, and the way a person, and what a, like, let's say the poetry a person makes of their life. Like,
Right.
that's the kind of truth
Yeah, and I remember
that's
something.
referred to.
I never looked into the ancient Greek on it, but was it in Ephesians chapter 1? It says, doesn't it say we are God's poema?
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
yeah.
translation.
Poesis. Yeah.
Poiesis, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a great cherry picker, and I found a lot of scriptures that encouraged me. to be patient and endure whatever it was going to take for circumstances to play out in such a fashion that I would in fact eventually be completely healed of. I remember the story of Nehemiah and how the walls were all broken down and the rats were climbing over the walls.
Mm.
And then he, I guess, was commissioned by God to rebuild those walls. Well, that's the way, my soul was. It was just ruins with rats climbing over them. And I took that to heart and I said, God's going to do this for me, be patient. I mean, I said when I was first born again, I was probably manic for the first 6 months. And then I started having, incredible depression. And I'm there, what happened to God? Where'd he go? And what am I doing wrong? And, your first inclination is to think, I'm not humble enough. I must be sinning in some fashion. God, help me discover what that sin is and help me to root it out. And but that was just the beginning of understanding that it isn't all this mountaintop experience, so to speak.
Right.
Now
I was listening. I was re-listening to. I actually found a really good audio. It's one of my favorite David Bentley Hart shorter pieces. There's an essay he wrote called "Christ and Nothing." That is, it's a critique of nihilism and a critique of modern culture. But one of the things he says in there that actually, even though I've read it several times, listening to it, I found a really good audio recording of it. And I listened to this very well read audio recording of it by a guy with a British accent. And there was a part of it that hit me, that didn't hit me it didn't hit me before when I'd read it before. And that is that he connects Christian asceticism to love.
Mm-hmm.
And I sense that, like, the reason there is that connection is that when we're chasing the experiences, like a whole lot of your story was, and my story, if I were to tell my story too, there'd be a lot of the same thing, a lot of the chasing of the experience.
Sense that.
The problem is that we're filling it up with too much other stuff to be able to be able to feel that peace experience that you described that you had. Like, that's there for us, but the more we're chasing experiences, actually the harder it is for us to be able to find that place, because there's a restlessness that's built into that chasing of the experiences. So it requires some sort of asceticism in order to be able to ground yourself in that love. And then it makes everything, but then once that happens, then it makes everything else brighter and sweeter and more delightful. So it's not like it doesn't actually become like a complete withdrawal from the world. Even though you have to have like periods of withdrawal in order to be able to come into contact with that. I don't know a better way to express it, but
yeah. Well, actually, when Jonathan Peugeot, I don't know if it was the second day of the conference or maybe it was the first day that he got up, and he was talking about, this is hard, this is hard. And he was giving, I can't remember the exact details, but he was sort of saying, this takes time and it's hard and it's very disappointing at times, and you may think you're lost, but you aren't, And I wanted to go, yeah, amen. I'm going to get up there right then and there and tell him, it's like I was involved in a Bohm dialogue group for many years. I don't know how familiar you are with David Bohm, but it was all about suspending your assumptions. And of course, all your belief systems are based on your assumptions. And it's just, the philosopher A.N. Whitehead talks about the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, which is our assumptions. And it's just astonishing if you can suspend an assumption and see it for what it really is, it disappears.
Mhm.
And it was like that was part of my, after I left the church, going through that for several years of suspending one assumption after the other, like that I had built this system of belief on as a Christian, and not just as a Christian, but as a persona of who Peter Alledge
Right.
is. And our persona,
Because they're not right. There's like there's an idea of a Christian that is just like, well, that this is what this Christian group has decided a Christian should look like. So if I just follow the whatever it is that this group has prescribed the Christian looks like, that's going to make me a Christian. But that really is just
and we've been
a
trained
persona.
by the enlightened world for the last 500 years to trust the expert, which are the new priests, right?
Right.
They are the new priests.
Yeah.
And people, if there's one thing I share with my friends over and over again is finding my salvation, finding my peace in God, finding my wisdom in God is runs concurrent with my discovery of who I am, discovering my autonomy. That God gave us autonomy for a reason, so that
Yeah.
we not be deceived by, like how it says, even in the end times, that even the very elect could
Well,
be deceived.
by the cosmos, right? Because the cosmos offers us a powerful delusion,
Right.
and lots of experiences to choose from. But what we crave, but what we really crave is God. You can almost tell, like, I don't know, to me, it's like one of the best ways to discern like how deep and profound someone's conversion is when they have a conversion experience is how much that person remains who they are fundamentally.
Yeah.
So like I know like a lot of times we'll talk about how people will talk about how they've changed and changed for the better, and that's all well and good. I'm not critiquing that. But there's something that suggests that a conversion was more profound when someone is even more themselves. So that's like to me it's like I just read Martin Shaw's newest book recently, and this is like I'm pretty sure this is the first like full-length book he's written since his conversion. I think Smoke Hole might have been written after his conversion. But in any case, like I've read some of the stuff that he wrote before his conversion, and I've read like his newest stuff, and Martin's just more Martin. Like there's nothing like he's more Martin. He's not less of whatever made him unique and amazing and awesome before is there even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that. So that's like that's how I know it's like what when he talks about seeing the mossy face of Christ, I trust that encounter. I can trust that encounter he had was very real and transformative and profound because of the fruit that I see come out of it, which is that he is even more what he was
Mm-hmm.
before. Before, so like it's not like you you don't you don't lose your identity in Christ; you gain it.
No, and
You
that's
become
a
more of what you are.
there was a time, as probably that I intellectually trying to understand. Well, I don't really want to lose my identity,
Right.
and I didn't know quite how that would work, especially when it comes to these kind of um, arguments about what it's going to be like in heaven, and or whatever. I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
kind of useless arguments,
Right.
but they're fun. But yeah, I started to mention David Bowman, and during the time I was in there, I had this thought. I said, every time I have a conversation with anybody, I walk away thinking, well, this is what I'm going to say to him next time, and this is what I should have said, and oh, I could have told him this, and I could have told him that, or somebody will say something to me, and I'll spend the next 3 weeks figuring out what I'm going to say to them the next time I see them, you know? And somewhere around the time I was 40, I I used to be a big fan of Jeopardy when I was a kid. I
Yeah,
love,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and somehow I thought, you know, I'm spending a lot of time trying to memorize data, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
so that when I encounter this individual or this girl or whatever it is, I've got the facts down and they're going to be impressed with me, you know, or I'm going to win this argument and something.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
somehow around the time I was 40, I said, well, I did this. It's kind of like a thought experiment. Like, what if I stopped doing that? What if I stopped trying to memorize, you know, paragraphs of books that I've written that I could impress people with, you know? What if I stopped thinking so hard, basically? Um, is there another part of me? Is there another part of my body that would be embedded with the Holy Spirit that would take me to another level of consciousness, which is where I really want to go, which is love, a deeper understanding of love, and a deeper desire to embrace people and love people and be creative without the angst in my life. And at that thought experiment, I still don't know if it's correct assumption on my part,
I think
but
it is. I think
I
it
think it
is.
I
I
think it
think it
is.
is. And I gotta tell you, like, this is kind of like, and I sometimes I do it better than others, but this is actually like how I try to conduct these conversations.
I know that.
Yeah, I really do.
That's what
It's
I
like
love about you guys,
I
man.
try to put out as much as, like, I mean, I read books and stuff and prepare for them, obviously, because a lot of times we're discussing books. But I try to be in the moment in the conversation and not to allow that to um not to be too much worried about what I'm going to say next, but really to be and to be primarily focused on listening to what my conversation partner is saying,
Right?
because
And the truth is, if you're full of thoughts about what you're going to say next, you're not hearing anything the person's saying.
bingo, you're not hearing anything they're saying. Exactly right. Yeah.
And you can't have what they used to call it, koinonia, or fellowship with that person,
Right.
not a true
Right.
fellowship, not a true connection.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, well, um yeah, so why do you think that um the church in most of my lifetime, and it's from, it sounds like, listening to your story, most of your lifetime, why has the church been kind of bad at that?
Well, I mean, this could go off in a lot of wild directions. Sometimes it
It just
does.
happens to be something I was thinking about a lot today, because
Yeah.
I was thinking about, like, I just recently had Alexander McCrease on my channel, and I was
Sorry,
talking
Alexander who?
McCrease.
Okay.
Yeah, he's and I was talking to him, like, we talked to, like, I've been doing some role-playing game related content on my channel, which is why I talked to him, because he's a game designer. But our conversation was like, went into metaphysics and all kinds of other stuff, because he's a very smart guy, and was very interesting to talk to. But the part of that conversation that really hit me was, I asked him, because he, like, in about 2018, the cancel mob came for him, and like his
Mhm.
game showed up on list of, like, games you shouldn't buy because the people who make them are bad.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with his games. Like, he like, the company that he was running was funding Milo Yiannopoulos, and so he was just automatically a bad person. Like, he was automatically a bad person because of
Sure.
that.
Sure.
And when he talked, I asked him about like what it felt like to be canceled, and what he told me was that it felt like when he was bullied in high school for just like being a nerd. And what made it similar to him was that there's just simply is no there's no defense available, right? It's like this label is thrown on you, and it's just like it's just what you are. It's an identity that's put upon you, right? And that it's just what you are, and there's absolutely no defense against it. And what's I didn't it didn't hit me, and it didn't hit me in the conversation, but afterwards I was listening to one of Grimm's latest live streams, and Grimm is very focused on talking about the dissolution of the family as like a big that's like one of his main issues that he hits, and he talks about it all the time. And it occurred to me in listening to Grimm that out like there's a way in which like the the way we fight the culture war, the kind of immaturity that exhibits itself in the way we fight the culture war, and like just our inability to like listen to each other and hear each other's stories, and like maybe sit across from someone who has a different point of view from you but still think that they're a human being. Like a lot of that is just flat immaturity. It's just flat immaturity. It's like we have like generations, multiple generations now of people who just like have never really grown up,
Well, I agree.
that are behaving like children and never have learned to have grown-up conversations. So there's a way in which like the dissolution of the family is like kind of like down. I mean, the culture war is downstream from that. Like that's why we can't have civil discourse, is because no one knows how to, because no one ever became a grown-up.
Right.
And when that is when the culture is to me, it's like to me there's like the church is implicated in this, and I don't see how to avoid it, because I think Vervaeke tying agape to parental love is exactly correct. And if we can't have, and if the church is not able to step in and demonstrate agapic love to people when it's failing in the when it's in short supply in the culture,
Mhm.
then who else is supposed to do it?
Right.
So like it has to be seen as a challenge. And it's like I really think that like that's kind of what we're doing in Estuary, is like it's part of what's going on, is that we're sitting there and we're trying to have grown up healing conversations where we listen to each other, and we try to show that, you know, that agapic love that is just like missing from so many people's like experience of life and experience, and frankly too often missing from their experience of the church. It's like if you can't like if the church isn't like if the church is not willing to listen to you and to hear your story, then what does that say about the church?
Sure.
You know, it's like I told it was, you know, and it's funny, you all like my
I
parents.
have to I just interject. I laugh when you say, "Oh, you're starting to prick my Christian anarchist, the part of me that's a Christian anarchist." I always laugh when you say that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Yeah, that's like, but when I talk about Christian anarchism, it's like that's what I'm talking about. Like it's like that. It's like we gotta find a way to like radically love people. We just do, and it's like I don't have a lot of
So,
patience. I don't have a lot of patience for people whose visions of Christianity is something other than that. I
the
just don't.
um, I'm a part-time philosopher, right? One of my favorite philosophers is Ortega Gasset. Are you familiar with him?
Mm-mm.
Um, he was a Spaniard around 1920s to 1950. And he talks about, in terms of ideology, saying, that the modern progressive project, I'm paraphrasing this, they want to start at the top of the mountain with, that ideal form of, oh, we should all love each other, we should all be generous to one another, and we shouldn't bully or judge anybody. And he says, you can't start the journey at the top of the mountain. You have to start at the bottom of the mountain. And it's like in the process of climbing the mountain, you endure all these obstacles in your life, and struggles that teach you how to get to the top of the mountain or to that ideal. And unless you climb up the mountain, you don't know. That ideal is not embedded in you. But in the process of climbing up that mountain and enduring all the obstacles life throws at you and all the experiences, the reality of that ideal form becomes embedded in you. But you can't go there. And we live in a world of institutions. This has been true for close to 500 years now, and the church is part of an offshoot of that kind of institutional mentality. This is my big theory, Nate. And
no, go for it.
It's an epic in history. It's an epoch. And whether or not you believe somebody like, who's the guy that influenced Barfield, who's really into angels and epics of time?
Rudolf Steiner.
That there are certain epics and certain angels have charge over those certain historical epical times. We live in a time where, institutions, the narrative is controlled by institutions, whether it's the state, whether it's the schools or the church. And, I have this conversation with my friend Chris all the time. We discuss this constantly about, we always come back to the fact that institutions live for one thing, to grow in power, and everything they do, everybody they hire, everybody who's like mid-level does mid-level bureaucratic jobs. You would be one.
Yeah, I am. I'm exactly what I am.
Is to infuse that institution with more power, and the one thing they're not going to do is give up that power. They're going to do everything within their means to keep that narrative and keep that power. And I mean, I get this. I'm going in, kind of broad strokes here.
Well, you're preaching to the choir when you're talking to me about that, though. In our language,
where is the
in our language in the church, like, we can see the outlines of what the image is supposed to be. The church is supposed to be a household. It's God's household.
Yeah.
We call, it's like, at least in the traditional forms of Christianity, you call the priest father, right? In the Catholic Church, the head of an order of sisters is called mother, right? We call each other brother and sister. It's familial language. It's actually, and it is, so it's not the language of hierarchy. It's not the language of the polis. It's familial language.
And we don't know what the church was like. I mean, you talk with individuals who study, the early church fathers, and, you talk about, you've got, I forget his name, he's written a book about Maximus the Confessor and
Jordan Daniel Wood,
and all these guys. But what was it like prior to, the Enlightenment? What was it like in the church? I mean, I assume that priests and nuns, they probably went and ate at somebody's house every night of the week.
Right.
They were part of their family. I can't say that for sure, but maybe it was like that. I don't know, but I know for certain, in some ways, I didn't want to share this full-blown story of my salvation that had to do with my being pretty crazy, but I did anyhow. Okay. But there's a part of me that, and I know what the pitfalls are of fundamentalist, born again mega churches. I've been through it, but there's a part of me that you rarely hear people share those kind of road to Damascus kind of conversions.
Mm-hmm.
I never hear them from
Mm-hmm.
anyone. Certainly not from the pulpit. I hear stories secondhand. I hear doctrines. I hear propositions about what the Word of God means.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. There seems to be that kind of that mysticism or esoteric nature of the aesthetic Christian life that's missing. This is why I love your guests and all these
Yeah.
conversations you're having. That I just, for the life of me, I mean, I assumed when I became a born again Christian in Oregon, in Eugene, in 1975, that everybody else there had the same experience that I had. That
Yeah.
had the same vision and the
Mm-hmm.
same thoughts. And it took me a long time to figure out that they didn't. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them had just been convinced intellectually
Mm-hmm.
that they should be part of a church. But anyhow, I don't know. Without going overboard, there needs to be a return to some kind of a mystical element that just seems to has been missing for.
Well, and I think that I mean, the Pentecostal movement, in you know for all of its flaws, I think it's one of the reasons that I think the Pentecostal churches are still doing fairly well, is that there's a seed of something there. And I also want to say that, like, even in the churches that um I would disagree with, like, in terms of dogma, like, there's enough Jesus there that it's not nothing, you know
Right.
and like, it's interesting. I was listening to David Bentley Hart's recent interview with the Christian Century, and he said a lot of things in that conversation that I'm sure that would trigger a lot of people that identify themselves as Christian. But what he said in that interview was still very, very deeply and profoundly Christian. Like, when he talked about when he started talking about the resurrection, like like how deeply he believed what he was saying was, like, palpable. Like, you could feel it when he was talking.
Mhm.
And he talked about how, like you can try to intellectualize it away all you want, but if you look at the record, it there's no denying that large numbers of people had some kind of encounter with the risen Christ, regardless of how you want to theologize about it or theorize about it. Like, people had some kind of genuine encounter that it's pretty hard to deny based on the historical record of what happened. And at the end of the day,
They want to argue the historical record when they should experience it firsthand.
right, but yes, that's exactly right, exactly right. But it's like David saying that about the historical record isn't going to that's exactly where I was going, Peter.
It's not
Thank
going to
you.
move anybody.
Right. So that's not going to move anybody. But David, you could tell by the way David was talking about it, that
Sure.
that he's had that encounter himself,
Oh yeah.
and he knows what he's talking about.
Right.
And he and Christ is alive and can be encountered now by people in the same way. But that's the thing and I think that, like, there's a way, like, I really feel like, even though I, like, say, like, take my mom, like, I argue about, like, doctrine and dogma with my mom a lot. But there's no doubt in my mind that at the bottom of whatever drives her belief is some kind of genuine encounter with Christ.
Sure.
And I don't really care about whether we disagree about the dogmas or not. It's like, do you know Sam the Unitarian? Sam the Unitarian?
No,
Okay.
I may have come across him a couple months
Okay.
ago.
Okay. So he has a channel called Transfigured, and he's Sam the Unitarian or Sam the Heretic. It's like Sam. I have had a couple. I talked to Sam with not as often as I would like, but I talked to him at a reasonable amount, and we've had a couple of conversations. And it's like Sam. It's like I don't agree with his theology. I think I don't agree with his philosophy, but he's a Christian. He clearly is he in some fashion he's encountered Christ and the way he lives his life. That's what which brings it back to that McDonald quote, right? About what the kind of truth that Christ is. Christ is not. It's like if you try to link the kind of truth that Christ is to an object in the world or a set of doctrines or a set of dogmas, it's always going to elude you because that's not what it is. It comes down to that. It's a truth. It's a truth lived. It's a truth breathed. It's a truth loved. Like that's the kind of truth it is. And whatever brings people into contact with that, I can't criticize entirely. Right. And I'm lucky enough to have. I mean, I'm very blessed right now to be.
That was like the community. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
No, I'm just very blessed right now to be in a little Anglican church with a priest who reads a lot of the same books that I read and has ideas that are very compatible with mine. And
I don't know if or when that's going to happen to me. And I do want to say, continue what you were saying, that being part of that commune for almost 5 years was fabulous for me. It was a refuge from the world where I could be a hermit and study scripture and consider, weigh out what I thought was, true and what isn't true about the doctrines that were being preached to me. But it was like a hospital, and the people there, up to a point, they loved me. Of course, I never said the night they threw me out of that commune, I had a dream. And in the dream, these giant, those old Duesenbergs or Mercedes Benz with the top of the doors were almost 5 feet off the pavement, those giant cars that were built around the 30s. They were, SS cars. Well, in this dream, the night they did that to me, these two giant black SS Duesenbergs pulled up in front of the commune, and they had big swastikas on them, and they got out and went into the house there. And it was interesting because for all that love, in which it was love, these people loved me, and they were good people. There was a part of it that I intuitively sensed that if they continue on this track, it's going to become, another ideological trap. That's what it's going to come down to in the end, Yeah. They're going to do more damage than good in the long run. Maybe not tomorrow or the next day, but, and I could have been wrong, but, a lot of good came out of it for me, as well as the other church that I belonged to for 10 years. There was a lot of love there, a lot of great people and everything. But again, I sensed in the future, I could see the patterns lining up that, in some ways, I think what a prophet is somebody that just discerns the times we're living in and knows
that's exactly
patterns so well that they know what the consequences are going to be if we continue to live out this pattern that we're living. And I could see, I just knew down the road, this was all going to fall apart. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 5 years, but there wasn't going to be any fruit left someday, and there were going to be a lot of bitter people,
Right. Well, yeah, that was probably them. Yeah. Well, a lot of those, it's really strange. I don't know what strange turn of history caused like so many of the people that like lived in those communes like that to like within a very short period of time. By 1980, they're Reaganites. How does that happen? It's like They supported Carter in 76, and then by 1980, it's like 4 years later, they're
But you know,
Reaganites.
that's interesting because when I was part of this church in Eugene, they started bringing in like corporate CEOs who were born again Christians that were part of probably Chuck Smith's Church of the Way down there in Costa Mesa, California.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly, and it was just the first year that I was there, they started setting up tables in the lobby outside of the sanctuary where they were asking people to sign political petitions to send to our congressmen and senators regarding a number of issues. It doesn't matter what the issues were, but they started politicizing the church in a way
Mm-hmm.
that has continued to this day.
Continued to this day, and also the trend of running the church as if it were a business.
Yeah.
Like, and so it's like, okay, so if we're running the churches as if it were a business, what principality is guiding the church? Like, you're mammon. Like, if you're running the church as like, then Christ is no longer as a business. Then Christ is no longer the head of the church. And I don't care how much good you think you're doing. Like, the purpose of a church is not to put as many butts in seats as possible. It is to nurture as many human beings as it can, like with love. Like, that's what the role of a church is, and to help broken people repair themselves. Like, that's the job of the church.
Comfort.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why when I it's funny, it's like I've seen several commentaries around this little corner about Jesus Revolution, but I have not heard anybody comment about, like, I when I saw that movie, like, I found it was really moving to me. And it, like, first of all, I felt like it gave me some sort of connection to my parents because it was kind of a window into their own story, because that's what they came out of. And then I couldn't help but, like, watch that movie, and it's like, okay, so that was the fringe that of the culture at that time that was knocking on the door of the church. And somehow the church, like, for all, I mean, I've criticized the church a lot in this conversation, but the church hasn't always and only failed, right?
Yeah.
So there was the church at that time, at least portions of it, found a way to, like, bring those people in. Well, what is the church doing now to reach out to the, and I'm not suggesting that the people at the fringes coming into the church are not going to have to, like, change anything about their lives, and that the church isn't going to make any demands on them or anything like that. But I just don't see much sign that there's any desire to be at anything but at war with them.
Yeah. I have this, again, time will tell, but I have this this theory, this intuition, and I'm sure you listen to John Vervaeke, you listen to Jordan Peterson, I do, and I listen to all kinds of, theories of everything, Eric Weinstein, all these people, and the intellectual dark web, and there does appear to slowly be a convergence between science and religion that's sort of, I think, happening. And when John Vervaeke was talking about the nexus at Chino, I found it surprising that when Paul Vanderklay said, well, you're the nexus, this is the nexus, and John Vervaeke seemed startled and went, oh my God, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I never thought of it that way. And I thought that the whole purpose of the Chino conference was forming and taking place like that was because there is a nexus happening.
Well, yeah, and one of the things you talked about is the coming together of science and religion, and I can think of very few.
Maybe it's going to be a new church.
There are very few people who more exemplify that than my friend Karen Wong. the work that she's doing on her channel, the Meaning Code.
I
Like,
have to check that out. The
oh
meaning code.
yeah, she's like, that is her, like, that is the place where she has, I think for the good, has like planted her flag, is in this dialogue between science and religion. So she has scientists on her channel all the time,
Yeah.
and she's very much working that intersection between science and faith. And I think that's true. I think well, I mean, I
And you
just did.
have people like
Tom Berg definitely thinks that's the case, which is why he keeps
yeah,
pointing to Teilhard de Chardin as like an exemplar of what the future could possibly hold, if we like stop thinking that these things are in conflict with one another. And I think that's what, I mean, Goethe is like downstream from both Steiner and Barfield. And this is clearly what Barfield has in mind. Like, Barfield thinks that we need to pass through modernity, not that we like that. It's not like they're like we we can't just go back. There's no way, there's no pathway back to original participation, right? This is actually, at the conference, I couldn't help but see a lot of intersection between Pajot's lecture, particularly the part when he was talking about, in some ways we have to do it consciously, in some ways we have to LARP. Like, I think that is part of what Barfield is talking about, with the idea of final participation, because final participation, there's a way in which, like, it has to be willed, it has to be generated. It's not just, doesn't just happen automatically in the way that original participation does. It is a hypostatic willed mode of participation. Like, that's what's open to us, as moderns and postmoderns, meta moderns, whatever. I think it's all
well,
just,
I learned
I
a
think
new
it's just
word.
the long arc of modernity. But
Yeah, I mean, it's evolution of some. I mean, I learned a new word, acapitastasis,
yes, the
apoptosis,
restoration of all things. Yeah, yeah,
restoration of all things. And you were,
yeah,
I think, in that same particular podcast, you were talking about universalism.
yeah,
The salvation of even Satan, God forbid.
yeah,
And I mean, I entertain those thoughts all the time.
yeah.
And but when it comes to, I mean, and I say this in conjunction with this convergence of science. I mean, they only started seriously studying consciousness in 1996 when David Chalmers came out with that book. Um,
Hmm.
I can't think of the name of it right now. But to hear people like, are you familiar with Bernardo Kastrup?
Hmm.
Yeah, I love the
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
He talks about his daemon, and he
Hmm.
he doesn't talk about his daemon in the same way that Rudolf Steiner would, or Tom
Hmm.
Berg, right? But he's talking about the same thing, you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
he's coming completely from a scientific background,
I
and I
think,
mean,
yeah.
there's quite a few people like that out there. Suddenly, Donald
Right.
Hoffman, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think we've kind of like, the game that we were playing is kind of like run its course, and new
So is
avenues are
that
opening
is
up.
that where the metaphorical fuel is going to come to you know create some kind of new institution of a religious nature or something? I don't know.
I don't know. I think our path is away from institutions. I really do. I think that
Yeah,
I
the
I just I
the
don't.
internet. It's
Yeah,
just
I think the internet, it makes it impossible.
yeah.
I think
You can't censor it. You know,
well, I don't know. They're going to try, especially with
we're
AIs
gonna
coming.
try.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's like, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of potential for dark horizons, and but there's some really beautiful, exciting things happening too. So we'll see. I don't know
there
what the
is.
future holds.
There is.
Um, I don't. I just there are very few things that I am certain of, but um one of the things I am certain, there are two things I will say that I'm certain of. That is that the essence of God is love, and I know that because to me, God is revealed in the person of Jesus Christ, and human nature is also revealed in like he's the God man, right? So it's like it is not only God that is revealed, but it is humanity that is revealed. What God is and what we can be are both revealed in the person of Christ, and the fundamental essence of that is love. And the other thing that I'm certain about is that in the end it will all be okay. All manner of things will be okay.
That
So
I'm confident as well.
you
I don't know how
know,
that's
and
going to
I'm
happen.
confident that last one I'm confident about because of personal experience. Like I
Yeah.
was of being on death's door and being very panicked like through the entire like dying process. And
Yeah.
then at some point like just recent well that place of peace that you were talking about like when you're in the like right it's just like oh and that's what I that's the that was the like it wasn't to call it a thought is kind of a misnomer,
I'm
but the
sorry.
feeling that I had, the feeling to call it a thought would be a misnomer, but the feeling that I had, the sense that I had was this deep just conviction that everything would be okay. Like I thought was, oh, I am gonna die, and then then I felt immediately after that, but all will be okay. And that doesn't make rational sense, but that was the experience I had. And then immediately after that, then the paramedic showed up and revived me. But
When you mention that, the mystery to me is that day in Eugene, Oregon, when that voice said to me, "What are you going to do tonight?" Well, go to church and pray. That didn't seem like it came from inside of me, you
right,
know.
right.
And when they talk of this is one of the things I just throw this out there because I'm constantly trying to understand how this all works, these forces, these angels, these gods, um, that, you know, it never said to me, I'm Jesus Christ, go to church, it's Wednesday night, go to church and pray. But it was a force, it was a being, it was an intellect, it was peaceful, it was compassionate, it was concerned, it loved me, and it knew that I was going home, and it helped me get there,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But it was supernatural too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right.
There
Yeah,
was nothing intellectual about it at that moment.
right.
um, but and I don't know where I was going with that exactly, but anyhow.
No.
But you know, I mean, I've had to wait 7, 10 years for certain things to happen in my life, but in the process of those things coming to fruition, I learned so much, that made it possible for those things to come into fruition. And if I didn't wait 7 years or a year here or 6 months here or 6 weeks there, um, I don't know, you know, I don't know how my life would have played out in those circumstances. It's
Mhm.
fascinating, but
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming and sharing your story with me, Peter. It was really nice to get to know you a little bit better,
yeah,
and I enjoyed our conversation.
I did too. And I just want to say, um, I just wanted to reach out and kind of feel like I'm part of this, and you invited me.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
maybe
I'm
down
glad
the
I
road,
did. I'm glad I did. This is
yeah,
this is this is great.
maybe down the road, I would like to participate. I know you're into the Divine Comedy already, but I would like you to consider me down the road if there's some book, some piece of literature that you want another party to be involved in the discussion, or you can't find anybody. I'm there for you.
I'll hit you up, Peter. Thank you for joining me. It was
You
really
give me
good
a
to get to know you
project, I can be very dogged about
You got it.
following
Thank you.
through on it. But I love you, man,
I love you too, Peter.
and
It was wonderful to get to know
stay
you.
true. Stay
I
true. We
really,
had
no, I really, I like, you were one of the people I really like that I just like, just at Chino. It's just like, you just like the energy, just like, it's like, oh, this is something. I'm glad I was glad that you reached out to me, because I definitely was, I was excited about getting a chance to talk to you again. So,
good. Well, I've been excited about this moment too. So,
okay, good.
all right.
Take care,
Hope to
Peter.
talk to
All
you
right.
soon. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.